This one's, I'm going to say it's a bit interesting because we got a partial burn. And did you see that? There's an ember there. There's an ember. I can feel the heat against my hand as I hold this camera phone. I put some coals on later at night, and as you can see there, combustion didn't begin with those. But the combustion was enough to carry on the reaction with the other coals, but it wasn't hot enough to get those coals going. So, lesson learned, I ought to have put the coals on sooner when I was hot and not feeling like I needed more fuel, but so it goes. I wasn't uncomfortable last night, that's for sure. So I'll just give it all a perfunctory poke, because with all this ash in there, it's going to limit how much it can breathe. And fires, just like creatures, they need to breathe. And if they don't breathe, then they get snuffed out. So let's just poke it all to a side, like so. There we go. Well, apologies for the clashing and the banging. Sometimes these things are inevitable. Ooh, it's inevitable. Yes, quite. Let's do this in an artistic arrangement, shall we? Yes, an artistic arrangement of sticks that are going to be burnt. Yeah, that looks good. Put another one like so. Now, have I got any of that good cardboard left? Because I reckon cardboard's going to get this going. Yeah. Let's have a look. Nope, that's rubbish cardboard. If cardboard has print on it like that one does, it doesn't burn as well. One moment, please. Right, got some cardboard now. So this stuff's ideal. I mean, it's, apart from a bit of tape, it's just untreated wood fibres. It's what you want to get a fire going. He says trying to tear a piece up single-handedly. There we go. I had a bit of fun this morning. I decided, because I hadn't done it before, and I don't know why I hadn't done it before, because normally this is the stuff I love to fiddle and fart with, but recently I decided to build a computer with some old bits I got, and it was primarily based around a Ryzen 1600X, because that's an old processor I got lying around, and it's a socket AM4 for those that are following along. And I thought to myself, well, I don't need anything modern. In fact, I don't want anything modern. It's a first generation Ryzen chip, so if I was to get a modern motherboard, there's a chance it wouldn't recognise it. Although I haven't done a bit more research into that, it turns out modern motherboards have larger BIOS EPROMs, which can store in all the data. So, because I remember reading something with the early motherboards, they said, oh, you got to be watch out, like when you update to this new BIOS thing, yeah, the new processors will be available to plug into the socket, but it won't recognise the old ones anymore, because it has to make room in its limited registry of what devices it can recognise. Anyway, based on this reservation, and also the fact that it'd be cheaper, I went with a B350 chipset. That's what I put into eBay, and I found someone was selling an MSI B350 Tomahawk, and I thought, oh well, I don't really use MSI before, and I didn't rate highly the motherboard that was in my well, I call him a friend. He's no friend of mine anymore, but I didn't rate highly the motherboard he had in that. Anyway, got it. Pleasantly surprised, especially seeing as I paid £30 for the motherboard. And yeah, I went into the bars today. I thought, oh, let's do an update. And couldn't do it because it doesn't recognise my USB device. But when I was in there, I just thought to myself, is there a way I can fiddle around with the fan settings? Because I'm more familiar with Asus motherboards than anything else. And yeah, there is hardware fan settings in there, and they're very good. In the hardware settings, it says, right, you've got four fan levels, and you can set what fan speed those fan levels should be at, so anywhere from 0 to 100. And then you set in what temperature threshold should this be set, and what sensor shall I use? So I said, well, use the CPU sensor because that's the most accurate one, and it's also the most pertinent because I want the fans to ramp up and down based on processor activity. And the way I have it configured now is up until 45 degrees, the fans stay off. And then after that, between 45 to 60 degrees, they stay at 40% of total power. And then after 65, they ramp up, and then if it goes above 65, it ramps up again. But by that point, it really means that you should be repasting your processor. Oh, and the other thing as well, of course, when I did it, because I bought myself a cheap but also fairly decent tower caller, a Be Quiet thing. I don't know what it's called, and it's got a fairly small fan on it, and I'm really impressed. I think I paid something like £20 for it, and I think it's the new Arctic Freezer Pro. If you follow along with heat sinks at all, this was a great heat sink in the 2010s era. It had a 92mm fan which rested in this rubberized cradle, so the grommets of the fan were all rubber, and that meant that all the vibrations from it were vastly reduced to the point of not being detectable. And I loved that fan and heatsink combo were great. And at one point, it was like something like £15 or £16 for it. Eventually, it went up to £24, and then at which point other heat sinks become better performing for that price. But for the price, I mean, I thought it was incredible. I loved it. So anyway, yeah, I was very impressed with this, and it's dealing with a fairly hot chip because the Ryzen 1600X, I was looking at the total dissipation power, so the amount of heat you can expect, and it's 95 watts. And my main computer currently uses a 3600, which has a TDP of 65 watts, so I mean, that's significantly cool. 95 versus 65. I mean, you're dealing with like a dim incandescent bulb versus a bright incandescent bulb, which, by the way, that illumination there, oh, no, I'm sorry, Defra and Greta Thunberg fans, it definitely is not a 100-watt incandescent bulb, wink wink. I'm using energy compliant LED bulbs, yes sir. It's not an incandescent in there. But anyway, point being, the 3600 significantly cooler chip, so at one point, if that's going to go into the cast-off computer, the leftover computer, and so the Be Quiet tower fan in there is going to have even less trouble dealing with it. Oh, I remember where my tangent was going with this. So my point being, the heatsink I got in there is more than adequate for the purpose. The processor will never get above 65 degrees. It just won't. And I know this because I've done an artificial CPU load on it. I ran Thermuck whilst running Prime 95 simultaneously. Now, other people could say, oh, Hobbit, if you're doing stress testing of your computer to, see how it performs under like the worst case scenario load, you'd be better off using something like folding at home. I mean, at least then your processor cycles will be contributing to useful medical research. And it's like, yeah, I could do that, but the fact is, I left the thing running for 10 minutes, so I don't know how much useful research can be done in 10 minutes, but it had plateaued after the first minute. After the first minute, it was running at 59 degrees, and it never went above 59 degrees. And so, really, I can just say, well, look, with this 95 watt chip in there, you get to maximum of 59 degrees, and that was before I had the system fan. Maybe I should run this benchmark again and stress test it. But really what I should be doing with my fan loads is, rather than this theoretical, oh, it might get to 65 degrees one day, it's never going to get to 65 degrees. So I might as well say, oh, well, if you get to 65 degrees, go to 100%. If you're wondering why I'm saying all this stuff, and if it's going over your head, that's not an issue. I found that if I talk these things out loud, it helps me plan and strategize what I'm going to do. Like I said to a friend recently, but I'm planning an upgrade on my main computer, where I'll be putting in a new processor, a 5800X3D. Really, really pleased with the socket AM4 that AMD came up with, and that they've supported it for so long. So I'll be getting that, which means then I'll have a 3600 left over, which will then go into the leftover computer. But at the same time I'm doing this, I'm going to get myself a new SSD because the prices for them have become insanely cheap. They're like twice as expensive as the hard drives now. And now, it's an NVMe SSD, which means it plugs into the motherboard. It's a little thing which is half the size of a credit card, and it fits into a socket there. Now, unfortunately, where it's positioned, you have to take the heatsink off of the processor, and I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of, you have to take the graphics card off. One moment, please. I had a look at my computer, and I couldn't see it because it's black and it's all black in there, but I saw a silver screw, and I thought, oh, okay, so it's there. So it's situated above the graphics card and it's underneath the processor, and in order to get to it, I really have to remove both pieces, but that's not an issue. I've done it before. I did it recently when I updated the motherboard's BIOS, and I had to get the little CMOS battery out to clear the BIOS. Turns out I didn't need to do that. But anyway, I did it and took the graphics card in and out. So, I was saying to my friend, like, the 5 steps I'm going to be involved in doing this, which is swapping the existing NVMe SSD out of the motherboard, putting the new one in. But prior to doing that, I'm going to have to back up the contents because it's where my operating system is, and I would like to just clone the drive. However, as the motherboard only has one slot for an NVMe drive, it means I can only put one in at a time. So what I have to do is clone the drive to the one of the other SSDs that's plugged in, verify it works, unplug the existing NVMe drive, plug in the new one, and that's how I'm going to verify that the SATA backup worked, because at which point the only drive containing the operating system will be the SATA one. Once that's done, I will then clone the drive to the new NVMe one, and then I will turn the computer off, unplug the SATA, and then I will verify that it's booting from the NVMe. Once that's done, great, I've got a system with a new processor in it, because I need to take the heatsink off, so I may as well put the new processor in at that time. So I've got my system with a new processor and a new SSD that's 1 terabyte instead of 512 gigabyte. And then I've got myself a 512 gigabyte, I just heard a little cracking bang noise, and it's probably one of these bricks that line the side. Now, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, so I'll have a leftover NVMe drive, which then can occupy the vacant NVMe slot on the motherboard. And then I'm going to do the same process. I'll be copying the operating system from the 250 gig SATA to the 512 gig NVMe SATA. And then I'll be saying expand this partition to use the entire drive, which it's something I've done before, but I'm inexperienced with it. So it'll be good to do it a few more times just so I got it down pat. And then that'll be it. So now, the much more straightforward thing to do is, you've got a new SATA drive. You've got a new NVMe drive. Just plug it into the upstairs computer, and you've got more than enough storage on the other one. You know, just get good at juggling files around, which is what I do anyway. But I like the idea of doing this. Now, why do I like the idea of doing this? It's more of a challenge, and I like easy things. However, it will be good practice in my education because I am planning to do IT. So, yeah, for the past few months, I've just been amusing myself with building a file server, managing a network, doing network experiments with DNS and routing and file serving and what have you, and doing BIOS updates, doing hardware configurations and all this other stuff. So yeah, I'm really glad I looked into this MSI motherboard and got it. Really, that was actually the luck of the auction. So I was looking at a gigabyte motherboard as well, and I was looking at another Asus motherboard like the one I've got there, which would have been interesting. To have the same motherboard in both computers would have been very good to do some comparative tests. But I ended up with an MSI motherboard and really impressed with that era of MSI's work. Well done, MSI. I can recommend your B350 Tomahawk, which you're not making anymore. No, I'm sure their modern stuff is probably just as good, and I'll definitely give them a look-see when I come to building an AM5 system. If I do an AM5 system, will AMD do the same thing they did with AM4, where they make it a long support cycle? Because if they did, they'd have another customer. I think that's a really good idea. I think if they can support AM5 as long as it's reasonably practical, at least don't do what Intel does. So it's like, we've had this motherboard for a year. It's time to do another motherboard. My friend Hemi, which I do a podcast with him on Thursday nights called 40 Words, and he's got more familiarity with Intel processors than I do, and he was telling me that they have made two LGA 2011 socks. So imagine you've got. It's got the same number of pins, but they're in a physically incompatible layout. Oh, and of course, completely different chipsets. So I just thought, who amongst the engineering team says, well, we're going to design this processor, but we're going to make a completely different layout for it, but it's going to use exactly the same. Why 2011 pins? Why not 2000 pins? Why not 2012 pins? Why not 2100 pins? My understanding is a lot of the pins on these processors, when you're dealing with something like 2000 contacts, a lot of it's earthing points. So why? Why are they all consistently the same size? I mean, if you've got a lot of them that are earthing points, why not just have it be one big blob? But hey ho. I am really interested in how they sort of go about the decisions when it comes to designing a chip and how it connects to a socket. I imagine ease of manufacture just makes it a lot easier to say, well, look, we're just going to have a grid array here, and all the contacts are going to be the same surface area, and that way it'll make manufacturing easier because all the little sprung pins on the motherboard will be exactly the same size, so they can be mass produced. If you're saying, well, this one is 130 microns across, but this one is 2,000 microns across because it's a big earth contact, well, you've just increased the bill of materials twofold. If your bill of materials was just it's one sprung and the surface area contact 130 microns, I'm not sure if that's a real number, by the way. I'm just assuming that the size of the pin there is pretty small. 130 microns is the size of a thick strand of hair. That's probably right. So I'm pulling that number out of my arse, by the way. Somebody in the comments say, oh, well, the actual human hair size is anywhere from 0.02 to 1.6 microns across. And if so, that's good. I've never really had to remember what the size thickness of a human hair is. But yeah, I'm going to push this log in a bit more because, or do I bring this? Do you see that one there? It's not in contact with that. I mean, we're talking about making contact here. But yeah, no, Intel seems to be going the opposite way of AMD, where they're just like, ha ha ha, we're making this new motherboard series, and we're only going to do 2 generations of processors that are compatible with it, release 6 months from one another, and that's it. Then we're going to move on to making a new motherboard. I mean, that must be a ball ache for manufacturers. Like, oh, okay, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing another one, are we? Oh, I guess we need to make new BIOS for that and everything. Whereas with the AMD manufacturers, like, oh, that motherboard we made 5 years ago, yeah, we're still supporting it. People are still getting chips in it. Now, you could argue, but what if the motherboard manufacturers like Intel, because they're justifying increased sales because they're artificially driving up demand? Who knows? Who knows indeed. I could have finished this video ages ago. I just saw the time go past 22:22, so goodbye.